Hey, welcome to Code Reviews. This is the first video in the Spring Angular authentication demo that we're going to build. So I'm going to open source this repo. I've already open sourced it, and I've begun adding code that you can run locally, that you can tinker with, you can use to learn from. And I'm going to pair the code with some videos. We'll do some code reviews of what we're doing. So this is the first video in the series, and what we're going to do today is just get Spring set up. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Spring Boot, we will be using it here, and we'll get set up. So I'm in this PJL software organization. It's a GitHub org. It's a Spring Angular auth repo. It's public. Anybody can go here. You can clone the repo, git clone, type in the repo name. We're already set up. You can pull the latest, and I'm on the master branch. So today we're going to check out this branch, Spring Boot setup local. We're going to get Spring Boot set up locally, and what we've done with our code is the following. So we have a Spring Boot app. We're getting everything set up, going through the initial startup. It's running. If you go to another terminal, you can curl the GET request, and what we've done is set up a health check. There you go. So we've set up a health check here at port 5001, health, HTTP, status up. So how did we do this? Let's look at the code. So I've opened up a PR, and we'll kind of go through what we've done to get Spring Boot set up. So the first thing that you'll see are some Maven code that I've added, and this is boilerplate code. So I use Maven as the build tool for Java. I use IntelliJ as my IDE. Some people use Eclipse or VS Code. I like IntelliJ. And I also like Maven. So other people might use Gradle. It's a lot cleaner. Maven's not super popular because people don't like the XML, which I totally get. It can be pretty annoying to look at. But Maven's always worked well for me. But what the Maven Wrapper is, in essence, is just a way to run Maven locally from the repo instead of globally on your local. So what some people might do is brew install Maven, get it installed locally on their computer. But what the Maven Wrapper is it is a Maven command that's local to the repo. So when you check out this repo, when you copy the code, it comes with its own Maven that I can then control. So Maven W is a command that you will get when you clone the repo, and it works the same way Maven does. It's just something that's local here. So in the PR, you'll see that there's just some boilerplate code that we've copied that has to do with the Maven Wrapper. If you want to learn more about it, I'll put some of these links below, but it's an Apache project. You can read more about it better than I can explain it. But anyway, that's what those codes are. So the next batch of code that we see is, this bin env. It's kind of these things I call bin executable scripts. And these are shortcuts that I've created to help you, after you check out the code, actually get it up and running. So it's basically just bash commands that I've put together that do certain things for you, and they come with help and documentation. So if you look at the repo, you have this bin directory, and if you just go into the bin, you'll see that there is another package directory called startup scripts. And we have 3 startup scripts here: build, build and run, and run. So if you have build, it comes with a help option. And it says build the Spring Boot jar locally. We'll skip tests. The example is it's going to run the Maven Wrapper for you, clean package with skipping tests. So all you have to do once you've cloned the repo is run this, and it will run the build for you. It should succeed at giving you everything that you should need. The other command that we have is run, which also comes with a useful help, and that will run the Spring Boot jar that we just built locally. Awesome. So if you do Spring run, knowing that you've already built the jar, it's going to start it. Awesome. Should be running it's running. Go back, cancel it, try to curl again. It's not running. Okay. So the third command that we have is build and run. Now, what does that one do? It's a composite script that will run the build and run the script. So the run script uses a jar. It needs a jar to be there. It needs the latest jar to run the latest code. So if you have build and run, you can do that, and it'll just do the build command, and it'll chain it to the run command. And once again, everything's running. So I've done this both for my own sake, to make my development faster and easier, self-document with code, and also it should make it easier for you to get things set up. So back to the code, what you'll notice is there's a .env file. So there's a hidden file. When there's a period, it's a hidden file. And this is a file all the scripts are going to load from one place so that I don't have to duplicate it. And what I have here is a quick check. So because this is running on your local, it's not containerized yet. We'll do that in a later session. We have a .env file which checks for if you have Amazon Corretto 17 set up somewhere. And then it sets that as your Java home. So I build on Corretto 17. It's the AWS flavor of the JDK. That's what I expect here. So it could work with anything. You could just update your Java home to whatever you have. But this is kind of an assumption I've made, and it gives you a warning. So if you have something different, like let's change this to 18, and then we go to build and run, you actually get a warning. And it says this code base assumes that you are using Amazon Corretto JDK 17, doesn't appear that you have it, even gives you a link to where you can install it. So this is just a way to kind of get you set up so that you can get everything running and you can start to tinker and learn. And it's also for me to keep myself sane and again to document. So we'll undo that. But that is the bin directory. You can use those to get the code up and running without having to do anything else. We talked about the env. We talked about the build script. And again, these are just bash scripts. You can look at them. It's bash, command line, follows a pattern that I use. Always try and document. Always try and create shortcuts. Save time everywhere you can. Great. So I did, update the info.md. This is just some information, some documentation on the application. You can read through that. Maven W is just boilerplate Maven Wrapper code. These are blank info.md files that I've created. Okay, so now we've gotten to the POM. So again, I use Maven as my build tool. You don't necessarily have to, but that's what we use here. And so this is where I've kind of added dependencies for everything I need. One thing that I'll call out is that I use a Maven multi-module project. This is another multi-module. So basically what a multi-mod project is, in essence, is independent, self-contained Maven packages, jars, just grouped together within those jars, and then as building blocks that are built up into larger applications. So this is a great way to keep your code clean and to force you to think about your code properly. And if you do it right, you'll be able to kind of plug and play these modules as you need for other code bases. So you'll very easily be able to just drag and drop the code that I'm pushing here into your own project to get started as well. But when I say they're self-contained and independent, basically there's a top-level POM that just says that it's, it has a submodule, PGL application, which is this. PGL application has its own POM, and it has a submodule, PGL application core. And it may look like I'm going crazy with modules, but it does make sense, as you'll see as the code gets more complicated. But I'm just doing it right now, so I don't have to refactor later. So you're in PGL core, and this is where you get to specific code. So this is a module within a module within a module. Again, it may sound confusing, but it helps in the long run, as we'll see. So I added some dependencies. This is a dependency that I always add. It helps Spring look for all the necessary files it needs in a multi-mod project. I include this. It's not technically necessary for what we're doing now, but it will be later, so I kept it here. I have the Spring Boot starter, the Spring Boot web MVC, and then the Spring Boot starter web. And all of these kind of add a different something to the code base. One thing I wanted to demo, so we have bin startup scripts, build and run. So Spring is interesting where if I comment out this dependency and I refresh the build, if you haven't worked with Spring a lot and you've just done little things with Java, you think that if your code compiles, everything's fine, it's going to run fine. So I've commented out this, the code will compile and everything looks fine. You're like, okay, great. Peter, why did you include that? I don't need it. Build success, it's running. Well, interesting enough, the Spring starts and then it stops. So it needs the Spring Boot starter web on the class path for the server to actually continue to run. This is just something about Spring. So don't just look and say, oh, you don't need this dependency because it doesn't run. It's running again. Like most people would comment all these out, and when you reload your Maven project, you'll get a number of compiler errors because all of a sudden you can't import the annotations you're using. It just throws up errors at you. But in Spring, not so fast, my friend. You really need to, you might need things and it's not clear why you need them until you kind of trial and error. So that is the POM file. These are the three kind of dependencies. The other build stuff is kind of boilerplate, not worth really going over. It's hooking up Spring and Maven, but you can kind of look into that on your own. There's not really much there in terms of running Spring. So we've gone through the POM. We have an application file, and this is the entry point to any Spring application. Basically, it's the main method. It has the Spring Boot application. It has what we're going to scan, and then I set the time zone just because it's something I like to do. And I found that later this will be good to have, to just set the time zone to something we want, regardless of where you run it. So that's the main method, pretty simple. And then so what we wanted to build was a health check. So we wanted to build that API. So I created, in the controller class, there's an application core controller, and it's just a health check. So get mapping health. So we're saying, whatever comes immediately after the URL. So when I curl, it's just this dash, and that maps to this dash. So every mapping within this class will have the same prefix. All right, so that works. If you change this to ABC, that same URL will rebuild the project isn't going to work because it needs to now be ABC. So we'll go here. It says 404. If you add ABC, health, there it is, right? So this is going to control the prefix for all the classes, and then this health is what comes after that prefix. And then the response is just this JSON object, which is a response entity in string. So all that's pretty simple. That's how you do a controller at the most simple level. Yeah. So the next files we're going to go through application properties. So Spring boots up, and there are all sorts of properties that you can set. I have two properties files here, application properties and application local properties. So local in this case is a Spring profile. Profiles are ways to tell Spring which properties you want to load. So if you're running from local, everything should be mapped to localhost. If you're running on dev, everything should be mapped to your dev server and your dev RDS. If you're on QA or performance, you would map to those specific things. So Spring's always going to load the application.properties file, always. And this is where I say I want my default profile to be local. So if I don't set a profile, use local. If you don't have this set, what you'll see is when you start this, you can see that the following profile was set local. But we've commented out the active profile. So if we rebuild this and we run it, nothing changed because I used the script. So when we're doing the run script, right here I have a command. So I'm saying run this active profile here. So if I take that out and we run it again, there will be no active profile set, so it's just going to do the default. So it says no active profile set, going to default. Now, if we go here and we uncomment this and we rebuild, build and run, it's going to say, okay, we're loading the application properties first. We're seeing that you want the active set to local, and so it is. So again, you can kind of see this change where if you do like A, B, C, D, whatever, you're going to see that reflected when you actually run the code in what it's talking about. So first it runs application properties, default profile, A, B, C, whatever. So we'll undo that. We'll undo our change here. So we're always going to use the active profile that we set, which is by default local. And then here is where we set 501. So it's saying when you run from local, it wants to use port 5001. Now, if you comment that out, it's going to run from port 8080 because that's what the default is. So it's not going to be 5001 anymore. So now when we curl 5001, it doesn't work. But if you do 8080, there, it works again. Awesome. So that's kind of the intro to properties files. That and profiles really. So kind of having active profiles. So eventually I'll have a application-dev.properties, which will have its own kind of set of profiles or property stuff. And anything that's shared amongst all property files, I can put here, and it's read in once, which is pretty cool. So those are the properties. And this is a POM, which just sets up the multi-mod project. Another POM just sends up the multi-mod project. And that's really it. So the next one we're going to talk about is I have another PR setup and I have another video setup. So what you'll notice is this is on HTTP, which nobody really uses. It's not secure. My browser won't even load this. So if you do HTTPS, it doesn't connect. To reboot or restart the application. All right, so application's running. Let's try it on HTTPS. Doesn't work. It throws this thing up and it says, HTTP method names must not be tokens. What that's effectually saying is you're calling, localhost 5001 health. Doesn't even work. You just get this thrown up. So if we can't use HTTPS and Chrome won't let me use anything but HTTPS, so I can try and get rid of it, but it won't load, I need to get this running using a self-signed certificate, which we'll do next. But this was just getting started. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll link to any comments or anything, the repo obviously. If you have questions, just let me know. If things don't work for you, just let me know. All right, thank you.